Hi, I'm Lena, and for my Islamic art and architecture exhibit, I wanted to talk about Rachel Breen's piece, The Shapes We Take. What drew me to the piece was that Rachel Breen is not Muslim. She's Jewish, and these pieces were inspired by time she spent in Bangladesh in 2015. Um, and since we talked about in class the fuzzy definition of what makes something Islamic art, I thought this would be an interesting topic to explore. In 2015, Rachel Breen went to Bangladesh and interviewed survivors of the Rana Plaza Factory collapse and interviewed labor organizers. And what she found while she was there was something that looked sort of like this. This is the state of the global garment industry. You have huge numbers of people employed in less developed countries, creating garments to be shipped overseas and creating a lot of waste, looking something like this. Um, and the subject of Breen's pieces is the combination of the waste, the workers, and the global systems of commerce and accountability. So Rachel Breen dubs the fabric pieces that you see in that like huge pile of waste as the negative spaces of our clothes. The actual medium of these pieces is scraps of fabric left over from completed garments sewn onto pieces of paper through lines created using the repetitive motion of a sewing machine. Um, to me, this speaks to the Islamic idea of like interconnectedness and patterns that has always sort of existed in the Islamic world in different ways in different times. In our modern day and age, countries like Bangladesh are less powerful in the global scheme, and but they're still interconnected to everything through things like the garment industry. Um, And so these negative spaces of our clothes reflect Bangladesh's position in the world right now. Um, this is a picture of a supply chain for the garment industry that I found. Um, and as you can see, it's very complicated. There's a ton of different people acting, and there's interconnectedness often up the chain. And you see this reflected in Rachel Breen's work. On the right here, we have Rachel Breen's sort of rendition of that kind of chart, where all these pieces are these messy fabric scraps sewn together in seemingly random connections. But the thing about these fabric scraps is that they aren't actually random. You have the piece of the fabric that you cut out to make the clothes out of, and then you have the piece that's left behind. And the piece that's left behind is going to be just as regular and organized as the actual piece that they use. And so you have this discarded, repeated shapes. And these shapes show up all over the art. But I want to zoom in and you can see the highly complex connections between these shapes to mimic the interconnectedness of the fabric of the garment supply chain. And then this is another piece that's not like a conceptual depiction of that, but instead like a literal map. And something that you're going to notice is that certain fabric scraps are repeated through each work, and that's because they were taken from the same location. So in the center of this piece, there's, if you can notice, there's the same that's at the top of this piece on the right, and then in this next piece, it's again in the center. And so there's these shapes that are repeated throughout the work, throughout the world, but are unnoticed. And I felt like that really responded to the Islamic idea of sacred geometry and patterns that show up throughout the world, and the interconnectedness of all things. And that is, I think, best shown in this piece called Greenwashing, where she's traced the fabric scraps. And I think that's really created the impression of sacred geometry. And those pieces, of course, are repeated in this last piece that I want to talk about because it draws it really well highlights the other big theme in her work, which is labor organizing. And um, I think that's really important to the conversation about fast fashion and the garment industry because so often um, the conversation focuses on what consumers in the West need to do and the impact that it has on our environment through wasted fabric and wasted water. But the conversation is rarely about holding companies accountable or supporting the workers themselves. And so that's shown the most, I think, through this final piece called Map of the Aftermath, in which these white fabric pieces are meant to represent the dead bodies of workers in the Rana Plaza Factory collapse. And in the background, you see sort of the negative space of these negative spaces repeated throughout and interconnected, sort of showing that this is not just like a Bangladesh thing, this is an all over the world thing. And I think the ultimate impact of this piece, even though it was in a gallery for a fairly short amount of time, is that it's drawing attention to what actually can be done to improve the global garment industry, which is to support workers and to hold companies accountable.